So we're going to move on to Unit 3, which is the structure and functions of living things. Like I said in class, we are going to focus on the cells at the cellular level, because as organisms become more complex with multicellular, the cells do about the same thing, only they have specific functions, and we will get into each of that. We start off with the cell theory. The cell theory has 3 parts. We will start with the first one. All living things are composed of cells. Everything from the smallest bacteria is a cell, protists, amoebas, they're all single cellular organisms, or unicellular, meaning one-celled, all the way up to, humans. We're multicellular. We have 10 trillion cells that make up our bodies. The second part of the cell theories is cells are the smallest unit of life. We cannot take a cell apart and expect the nucleus to support life by itself, or expect the mitochondria to support life by itself. It is all those small components that make up the cell, and then the self is capable of surviving on its own and supporting life. The third part about the cell theory is cells come from pre-existing cells and cannot be created from non-living materials. Pretty much living things come from other living things. We can't make a flower grow out of a rock, because a rock is non-living. We see flowers growing in the soil, but it is because of the seed, which came from another living organism, or pre-existing cell. Spontaneous existence doesn't happen. Okay? And we'll talk about some evidence of why this is. So we have all living things are made up of cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life, and then cells come from pre-existing cells, and that's the cell theory with those 3 parts. The development of the microscope really allowed for the cell theory to take off. With it, we could, look at very small objects that we can't see with the naked eye. Before the discovery of the microscope, we had, our naked eye, and then we had maybe small hand lenses, but nothing that would allow us to magnify or get to that small level. We also have a couple of scientists who really help support the cell theory, starting with Robert Hooke, first to use the term cell. Before this, it was known as a small room where a monk would live, very similar to what we would call like a jail cell. Not that the monks were in jail, but it's a small room that, you have the necessities of life, and that's it. Very much like a cell in biology, which is the smallest unit of life. Next is Anton von Leeuwenhoek, such a fun name. He's officially the discoverer of the cells and sometimes called the father of biology. He was the first microbiologist, so he was the first biologist of very small things. And he was the first also to observe a single-celled organism. We also have Louis Pasteur, who ran an experiment to help disprove spontaneous growth of life. Pretty much he copied Thomas Reddy's experiment, and we'll see that in the next slide. Robert Rummach also helped support cell theory because he was able to view cell division under the microscope. So he was able actually to visually see cells come from other living cells. So here's Pasteur's experiment. He is at the bottom here with a nice nice flask. Thomas Reddy is up at the top. He has the 3 jars of meat that he put in. He put paper on one, gauze on the other, and then left the middle one open, as you can see. And what this was to prove is that life doesn't spontaneously exist. It doesn't come from nothing. Okay? Obviously, the meat at the bottom of the jar is dead. Okay? But what people were noticing back then is that flies, kind of came about from this dead meat. And he proved that it wasn't the flies coming from the dead meat, but it was the flies from the maggots. So on the paper one, on the far left, you can see that he put paper over the top and there's no flies in it. In the middle, you can see that he left it open and there are flies. Oh, don't want to do that. In the middle. And then on the far right, The flies were able to land on the gauze and lay eggs, which became maggots, but the maggots couldn't get to the food to develop into flies, so they stayed on top. Pasteur did the same thing, very similar. He heated broth in these swan nest flasks, just fancy long-necked flasks. In one, he left the neck on, okay, and then they had no growth, okay, because he had boiled all the bacteria out of the broth. With air and bacteria not being able to get up the long neck of the flask, there was no growth. In the other one, he heated it, broke off the neck, and then air was able to get inside, and there was substantial growth of bacteria, so that we could see that the cells came from, or the bacteria came from living cells that were outside. Okay. If we go back, we are talking about cell theory. Again, all living things are composed of cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life. And then lastly, cells come from pre-existing cells and cannot be created from non-living material. Those are the three parts of the cell theory. We have evidence that helps support these claims, and that should be it for cell theory.